The marble halls of the downtown municipal court echoed with Dr. Maya Henderson's hurried footsteps as she rushed through the security checkpoint. The guard raised an eyebrow at her appearance. Khaki field clothes covered in a fine layer of desert dust, her normally neat braids slightly disheveled from working in the scorching sun. Her archaeology kit still hung at her hip, filled with delicate tools meant for uncovering history's secrets rather than navigating bureaucracy. "Ma'am, you'll need to remove your tool belt," the guard said, gesturing to the metal detector. Maya quickly complied, her mind still racing with thoughts of what she and her team had discovered just hours ago. The morning had begun with a routine dig at their newest site, but everything changed when one of her graduate students spotted something glinting in the earth, something that could rewrite the textbooks about early human settlements in North America. Her phone buzzed again, the 5th time in 20 minutes. Dr. Sarah Chen, her research partner, was probably frantic for updates about their find's preservation status. Maya glanced at the screen. 17 missed calls, and a flood of messages from her excited team. She'd never intended to leave the site on such a crucial day, but this court summons demanded her presence. The wooden benches in the courtroom were packed with other citizens waiting their turn. Maya slipped into an empty spot near the back, earning curious glances from those around her. The businessman in an immaculate suit edged slightly away from her dusty clothes, and she caught fragments of whispered conversations about her appearance. "Docket number 47, called out the court clerk, his voice carrying through the hushed room. "Dr. Maya Henderson." Maya stood, straightening her shoulders as she walked forward. The morning sun streamed through tall windows, catching the particles of dust that still clung to her clothes. She could feel all eyes following her progress to the podium. Judge William Barrett peered down from his elevated bench, his expression shifting from neutral to slightly disapproving as he took in her appearance. "Dr. Henderson," he began, emphasizing her title with a note of skepticism, "you're here regarding a speeding violation on Highway 16 last Tuesday." "Yes, Your Honor," Maya replied, her voice steady and professional despite her rushed appearance. "I can explain the circumstances. You see, we had just received crucial dating results from the laboratory regarding artifacts from our dig site, and I needed to." "A dig site?" the judge interrupted, shuffling through her paperwork with a look that suggested he'd heard every excuse in the book. Maya took a deep breath, her hand unconsciously touching the specialized dating tool in her kit that had helped confirm this morning's extraordinary find. "Yes, sir. I'm leading an archaeological excavation just outside the city. This morning, we actually made an incredible discovery that could change our understanding of." Her phone vibrated again, and though it was silenced, the judge's sharp glance made it clear he noticed. Maya quickly reached to turn it off completely, but not before seeing Dr. Chen's urgent message flash across the screen. "Carbon dating confirmed. Maya, this is bigger than we thought. How soon can you get back?" The judge cleared his throat, drawing her attention back to the present moment. The sunlit courtroom suddenly felt very far from the excitement and promise of her dig site, where history waited to be uncovered. She stood straight, ready to explain herself to a judge who seemed to have already made up his mind about who she was and what she represented. Little did either of them know, their paths would cross again under very different circumstances, and both their perspectives were about to change dramatically. Judge William Barrett studied the traffic citation before him, his wire-rimmed glasses perched at the tip of his nose. The morning sunlight streaming through the tall courthouse windows cast long shadows across his bench, highlighting the deep lines of concentration on his face. He'd heard thousands of excuses in his 15 years on the bench, and he prided himself on being able to separate truth from fiction. "So, Dr. Henderson," he said, drawing out her title with unmistakable doubt, "you're claiming you were rushing to your archaeological dig site." His tone carried the weight of countless similar hearings, each featuring what he considered creative explanations for straightforward violations. Maya stood straighter, her professional demeanor unwavering despite her dusty appearance. "Yes, Your Honor. I'm the lead archaeologist for the Southwest Heritage Project. This morning, my team uncovered artifacts that could date back over 12,000 years, potentially revolutionizing our understanding of early human migration patterns in North America. A few murmurs rippled through the courtroom. The judge raised an eyebrow, his pen tapping rhythmically against his desk. And I suppose these ancient artifacts couldn't wait for you to drive within the speed limit. Your Honor, in archaeology, timing can be crucial. Exposure to air and elements can. Maya began, her passion for her work evident in her voice. Ms. Henderson. The judge interrupted, deliberately dropping her title. I have a full docket today. While I appreciate your creative narrative, this court deals in facts. The fact is, you were recorded driving 20 miles over the speed limit on a public highway. Maya's phone buzzed again in her pocket. She resisted the urge to check it, knowing it was likely Dr. Chen with more news about their potentially groundbreaking discovery. Instead, she reached into her field bag and pulled out her university identification card. Your Honor, if I could just show you my credentials. That won't be necessary. Judge Barrett cut in, waving his hand dismissively. Your profession, real or imagined, has no bearing on your responsibility to follow traffic laws. He shuffled through some papers, barely glancing at her ID. This court finds you guilty of excessive speeding. Given your apparent lack of regard for the seriousness of this violation, I'm setting the fine at $500. The amount was significantly higher than the standard fine for similar violations. Maya noticed a few surprised looks from the court staff, but she maintained her composure. Years of carefully brushing away layers of sediment had taught her patience. Furthermore, the judge continued, I suggest you find more plausible explanations in the future. This court's time is valuable, and spinning tales about lost civilizations does not help your case. As Maya reached for her checkbook, her phone vibrated once more. This time, it wasn't just a message but a photo from Dr. Chen, a stunning image of their morning's discovery. The notification preview showed just enough of the ancient artifact to confirm what they'd suspected. They had indeed found something extraordinary. The clerk stepped forward to process her payment, and Maya caught his sympathetic glance. She taught long enough to recognize genuine curiosity in someone's eyes, and she could see he wanted to ask about her work, but now wasn't the time. As she turned to leave the courtroom, Judge Barrett was already calling the next case, her story dismissed as easily as morning mist burning away under the harsh summer sun. Yet Maya smiled slightly, knowing that by evening, her discovery would be making headlines that would find their way to a certain judge's evening paper. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over the Natural History Museum's Grand Hall, where the city's elite had gathered for the annual Heritage Foundation Gala. Judge William Barrett adjusted his bow tie, feeling perfectly at home among the marble columns and elaborate flower arrangements. His wife, Elizabeth, a museum board member, smiled and waved to familiar faces as they made their way through the crowd. William, you must meet the guest speaker, Elizabeth said, touching his arm excitedly. Everyone's buzzing about her discovery. They're saying it could change everything we know about early human settlements in North America. The judge nodded politely, more interested in the approaching waiter with champagne flutes. These scientific gatherings were Elizabeth's passion, not his, but he played his part as the supportive husband. He accepted a glass and scanned the room, noting several state Supreme Court justices and prominent attorneys among the guests. Did you see the headline in the Evening Post? A nearby trustee gestured animatedly to his colleagues. 12,000-year-old artifacts, perfectly preserved. It's unprecedented for our region. The museum director approached the podium, tapping the microphone gently. Ladies and gentlemen, if you'll please take your seats, we're honored to have with us tonight the brilliant mind behind today's extraordinary discovery. Judge Barrett settled into his chair at one of the front tables, absently studying the elegant program. Breaking new ground, rewriting history in our backyard. He took another sip of champagne as the director continued. She holds 3 doctoral degrees, has led excavations on 5 continents, and was recently featured in National Geographic's 40 Under 40 list of pioneering scientists. Please welcome Dr. Maya Henderson, lead archaeologist of the Southwest Heritage Project. The champagne caught in Judge Barrett's throat. He looked up sharply as a familiar figure approached the podium, though she appeared dramatically different from the dusty woman who'd stood in his courtroom that morning. Dr. Henderson wore an elegant evening gown in deep blue, her braids now styled impeccably, and she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to commanding attention in prestigious academic circles. "Is everything all right, dear?" Elizabeth whispered, noticing his sudden rigidity. Before he could respond, Dr. Henderson began speaking, her voice carrying the same passion he'd dismissed hours earlier, but now accompanied by a series of impressive holographic projections behind her. "What we uncovered today challenges our entire timeline of human habitation in this region," she explained, as 3-dimensional images of intricately carved artifacts rotated above the audience. "The preservation level is remarkable, and initial carbon dating suggests." Judge Barrett barely heard the technical details that followed. His mind raced back to his dismissive comments, his assumptions, his increased fine. Each of Dr. Henderson's accolades and achievements, now being listed by her colleague in introduction, felt like a personal rebuke. Elizabeth leaned forward, captivated. "Isn't she incredible? The university nearly lost her to Harvard last year, but they created an entire research center just to keep her here. We're so fortunate to have minds like hers in our community." The judge loosened his bow tie slightly, feeling the weight of the morning's misjudgment settle heavily on his shoulders. As Dr. Henderson fielded complex questions from renowned scholars with ease, he noticed something he'd missed entirely during their first encounter, a quiet dignity that had nothing to do with clothing or titles, and everything to do with character. The grand hall fell silent as Dr. Henderson gestured to the holographic display, where a delicate artifact slowly rotated in midair. Its intricate patterns, preserved for millennia, now cast ethereal shadows across the mesmerized faces of the audience. "What you're seeing," she explained, her voice carrying the quiet authority of expertise, "is not just another archaeological find. This piece challenges everything we thought we knew about early human civilization in North America." Her hands moved gracefully, manipulating the hologram to zoom in on specific details. "Notice these markings. They suggest a level of astronomical knowledge we previously believed impossible for societies of this period." Judge Barrett sat transfixed, the morning's courtroom scene playing in stark contrast to the brilliant presentation before him. The woman he'd dismissed so readily was now commanding the attention of some of the world's leading minds in archaeology. A distinguished professor from Yale raised his hand. "Dr. Henderson, how can you be certain about the dating? Couldn't this be from a later period?" Maya smiled, as if anticipating the question. With a subtle gesture, she brought up another hologram, a detailed timeline backed by data. "An excellent question. We've employed 3 separate dating methods to verify our findings." She launched into a technical explanation that, while beyond many listeners' comprehension, drew knowing nods from the academic contingent. Elizabeth Barrett leaned toward her husband. "She's brilliant," she whispered. "Did you know she developed a new dating technique that's now standard practice in the field? They call it the Henderson method." The judge merely nodded, remembering how he'd scoffed at her attempts to explain the importance of proper artifact dating procedures in his courtroom. Now, watching her effortlessly field complex questions from renowned scholars, he felt the full weight of his morning's prejudgment. "But the most fascinating aspect," Dr. Henderson continued, pulling up a new series of images, "is what this tells us about ancient migration patterns." The hologram shifted to show a map of North America, with glowing lines indicating various theoretical migration routes. "Our discovery suggests that human societies in this region were far more sophisticated and interconnected than we previously imagined." A ripple of excitement passed through the audience as she revealed more artifacts from the morning's dig. Each piece told its own story, and Dr. Henderson wove these stories together into a tapestry of human history that spanned thousands of years. "We found this piece," she said, displaying a particularly intricate artifact, "at the exact moment I was called away for other obligations." Her eyes met Judge Barrett's for just a moment, but she continued smoothly. "Its preservation is remarkable, thanks to my team's quick action in establishing proper containment protocols." The presentation concluded with a stunning virtual reconstruction of what the ancient settlement might have looked like based on their findings. As applause filled the hall, several department heads from prestigious universities could be seen making their way toward Dr. Henderson, cards and contact information at the ready. Judge Barrett remained in his seat, watching as she graciously fielded congratulations and requests for collaboration. Her earlier words in his courtroom echoed in his mind. Timing can be crucial. He understood now. She hadn't been making excuses. She'd been making history. The following morning, Judge Barrett sat in his chambers, the day's case files spread before him untouched. Sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating particles of dust that danced in the air. Dust not unlike that which had covered Dr. Henderson's field clothes the day before. He picked up his morning coffee, now cold and forgotten, his mind still replaying scenes from the previous evening's gala. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. "Your Honor, the first case is ready," his clerk, James, announced, entering with another stack of files. "James," the judge began, then paused. "Have you ever noticed how quickly I make decisions about people who come before this bench?" The young clerk carefully placed the files on the desk. "Sir." Judge Barrett picked up a case file, then set it down again. "Yesterday, a world-renowned archaeologist stood in my courtroom. I saw dusty clothes and a rushed demeanor, and I made assumptions. I didn't even look at her identification when she offered it. He stood and walked to the window overlooking the courthouse square, where people hurried up and down the steps, each carrying their own stories. 15 years on this bench, and I wonder how many other Dr. Hendersons I've misjudged." The morning sun caught the silver scales of justice that sat on his desk, casting twin shadows on the wall. The judge turned back to the figure of blind justice, seeing it with new eyes. "All these years, I thought being impartial meant being swift, being firm. But perhaps true impartiality requires taking more time, not less." James shifted slightly, then spoke with careful respect. "Your Honor, if I may, I looked up Dr. Henderson after yesterday's session. She's published 3 books, discovered 2 previously unknown ancient cities, and developed revolutionary dating techniques. She's even given a TED talk about making archaeology accessible to underserved communities." The judge nodded slowly, remembering the commanding presence she'd shown at the gala. "And I treated her like—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "Tell me, James, how many cases do we have this morning?" 12, sir, mostly traffic violations and minor disputes. 12 stories. 12 opportunities to look deeper." Judge Barrett returned to his desk and opened the first file with newfound attention. "From now on, we're going to start each session 10 minutes earlier. I want time to properly review each case, to truly listen to each person who stands before this court." He picked up his phone, hesitated, then set it down again. An apology to Dr. Henderson would come, but first, he needed to prove to himself that he could do better. He looked up at his clerk. "James, would you mind pulling the transcripts from my last month of cases? I'd like to review them during lunch." "Of course, Your Honor," James replied, a new respect evident in his voice. As the morning's first defendant was called in, Judge Barrett adjusted his robes and sat straighter in his chair. The woman who entered looked nervous, clutching a handful of crumpled papers. Once, he might have seen only the wrinkled documents and hesitant manner. Now he saw someone with a story that deserved to be heard. "Good morning," he said warmly, surprising both the defendant and his court staff with his gentle tone. "Please, take your time and tell me what brings you here today." Dr. Henderson's university office was a testament to a life dedicated to uncovering history's secrets. Shelves lined with academic journals reached toward the ceiling, while carefully preserved artifacts from various expeditions rested in climate-controlled display cases. Through the wide windows, afternoon sunlight illuminated a collection of photographs showing archaeological sites from around the world: pyramids in Egypt, temples in Cambodia, and ruins in Peru. When her assistant knocked and announced an unexpected visitor, Dr. Henderson looked up from the ancient pottery sherd she was examining. "Judge Barrett," she said, genuine surprise in her voice as the judge stood awkwardly in her doorway. "Dr. Henderson," he began, then paused, taking in the impressive surroundings. A wall of awards and honorary degrees caught his eye. Oxford, Stanford, the National Science Foundation. On her desk sat the prestigious Maxwell Award for Archaeological Achievement, its golden surface catching the sunlight. "Please, come in," she offered, gesturing to a chair across from her desk. A satellite map of her current dig site covered half her computer screen, while a partially written research paper occupied the other half. The judge sat down, his usual courtroom confidence notably absent. "I've been hoping to speak with you," he said, his eyes drawn to a particularly intricate artifact in a nearby case. "Is that?" "A ceremonial bowl from the Indus Valley civilization," she answered, her face lighting up with characteristic enthusiasm. "Notice the mathematical precision in the geometric patterns. It suggests they had advanced understanding of principles we once thought weren't discovered until much later." Judge Barrett leaned forward, genuinely intrigued. "Like your recent discovery, the one that's rewriting history books." "Exactly," she smiled, then tilted her head slightly. "Though I imagine you didn't come here for an archaeology lesson." The judge straightened in his chair. "No, I didn't. Dr. Henderson, I owe you an apology. My behavior in court was—" He paused, choosing his words carefully, a reflection of assumptions I didn't even realize I was making. Dr. Henderson remained quiet, allowing him to continue. A gentle breeze through the open window stirred papers on her desk, field notes from the remarkable discovery that had started this whole sequence of events. "Your work," he gestured to the room around them. "It's extraordinary. But more than that, it's taught me something important about judgment, both in and out of the courtroom." She picked up the pottery sherd she'd been examining earlier. "You know, in archaeology, we learned that the most important discoveries often come when we look past our initial assumptions. Every artifact, every layer of earth can tell us something unexpected, but only if we're willing to look deeper." The judge nodded, understanding the parallel. "I've started taking more time with each case now, listening more carefully to every story." He hesitated, then added, "I was wondering if you might be willing to share your experiences, your perspective, with other judges. We have a judicial conference coming up, and I think your insights could be valuable." Dr. Henderson set down the sherd and gave him her full attention. "You know, Judge Barrett, in archaeology, we have a saying: the real treasure isn't what you find. It's what you learn while finding it. I would be happy to share what I've learned." A student appeared in the doorway with news about the ongoing excavation, then quickly backed away, sensing the importance of the moment. Through the window, the sun was setting over the campus, casting long shadows that seemed to connect past and present, misunderstanding and understanding. The early morning sun cast long shadows across the archaeological site as Dr. Henderson led Judge Barrett through a carefully gridded excavation area. She provided him with proper protective gear, a wide-brimmed hat, sturdy boots and gloves, transforming him from his usual courtroom appearance into something resembling a field researcher. "Watch your step here," she cautioned, helping him navigate around delicate grid markers. Each square represents a different layer of time. We're literally walking through history. Graduate students looked up curiously from their work as the unusual pair passed by. Dr. Chen, Maya's research partner, smiled knowingly as she continued photographing the newly uncovered artifact. "This is where we found it," Dr. Henderson said, stopping at a precisely marked section. "The discovery that made me rush to court that morning." She knelt down, inviting the judge to do the same. See these soil variations. Each layer tells a story. Judge Barrett knelt carefully, his knees protesting the unusual position. "I've been thinking about layers lately," he said, running a gloved hand gently over the earth. "In court, we often only see the surface of things." A young researcher approached with a freshly cleaned artifact, carefully wrapped in preservation material. Dr. Henderson's eyes lit up as she accepted it. Perfect timing. "Judge Barrett, would you like to see how we piece together stories from fragments?" She led him to a nearby field station, where tables held carefully organized findings. With practiced hands, she unwrapped the artifact, a broken piece of ancient pottery with faded markings. "At first glance, this might seem unremarkable," she explained, placing it under a specialized light. "But look closer. See these marks? They're not random scratches. They're a form of early writing. Each line, each curve, adds to our understanding." The judge leaned in, fascinated. "Like evidence in a trial," he mused. "Details that might seem insignificant at first." "Exactly." Dr. Henderson smiled warmly. "In both our fields, rushing to conclusions can mean missing crucial details." She gestured to the busy dig site around them. "Everyone here is trained to work methodically, to question their assumptions, to look beyond first impressions." A cool breeze carried the scent of sage across the site as they walked among the excavation grids. Dr. Henderson pointed out various tools and techniques, explaining how modern technology and traditional methods work together to uncover the past. "You know," she said, pausing near a newly opened excavation unit, "when I first started in this field, people often questioned my capabilities based on superficial judgments. But artifacts don't care about assumptions. They reveal their secrets to anyone patient enough to listen properly." Judge Barrett nodded thoughtfully. "I've begun asking my clerk to schedule fewer cases each day," he shared. "It means longer hours for me, but each person who comes before my bench deserves the same careful attention you give these artifacts." Dr. Henderson picked up a small brush, the kind used for delicate cleaning work. "Would you like to try? Sometimes the best way to understand something is to experience it firsthand." As the judge carefully brushed away centuries of accumulated soil from a newly discovered item, he found himself thinking about the layers of assumption he was still working to brush away from his own perspective. Around them, the dig site hummed with activity. Students taking measurements, researchers comparing notes, and history slowly revealing itself to those patient enough to look closely. "Remember," Dr. Henderson said softly, watching him work, "every piece tells a story. We just have to be willing to listen." The International Archaeology Conference buzzed with excitement as distinguished scholars filled the university's largest auditorium. Dr. Maya Henderson stood backstage, reviewing her presentation slides one final time. Through a gap in the curtain, she spotted Judge Barrett sitting in the audience, looking markedly more comfortable in this academic setting than he had 6 months ago. "Dr. Henderson," the conference moderator called, "we're ready for you." She stepped onto the stage to enthusiastic applause, her presence commanding attention just as it had that night at the museum gala. The holographic display behind her illuminated to life, showing a three-dimensional reconstruction of their archaeological site. "What we discovered that morning wasn't just artifacts," she began, her voice clear and confident. "We uncovered a story about human ingenuity, about connections across vast distances, about assumptions challenged and history rewritten." In the audience, Judge Barrett found himself smiling at the parallel. He thought about his morning's court session, where he'd taken extra time with a young student facing a minor offense, discovering that she was developing an after-school science program for elementary children. Instead of a fine, he'd connected her with the university's outreach department. Dr. Henderson moved through her presentation with practiced ease, explaining how their discovery had led to 3 new research projects and collaboration with universities across 5 continents. "But perhaps the most unexpected outcome," she said, clicking to a new slide, "was the bridge we built between archaeology and justice." The screen showed a photo of her recent lecture at the Judicial Training Institute, where she'd spoken to a room full of judges about the importance of looking beyond surface appearances. Judge Barrett sat straighter in his chair, remembering the impact her words had had on his colleagues. In both archaeology and justice, she continued, we're searching for truth. Sometimes it's buried under layers of time, sometimes under layers of assumption. But with patience and willingness to look deeper, we can uncover it. After the presentation, as attendees mingled during a reception, Judge Barrett approached her with a newspaper in hand. The headline read, "Local Court Program Revolutionizes Case Review Process." "Your influence reaches further than you might think," he said, handing her the paper. "We've implemented new procedures based on what I learned at your dig site. Every case gets the full archaeological treatment now. Careful examination, multiple perspectives, proper time for discovery." Dr. Henderson smiled, remembering their first encounter in traffic court. And the results. Better decisions, fairer outcomes. Some cases take longer, but he gestured to the archaeological exhibits surrounding them. "You taught me that meaningful discovery can't be rushed." A group of young students approached, eager to speak with Dr. Henderson about her work. Before stepping away, she turned back to the judge. "You know, next month we're starting a new excavation. We could use an experienced perspective on careful observation." Judge Barrett laughed. "I might take you up on that. After all," he added, glancing at the students waiting to speak with her, "we all have something to learn from looking at things from a new angle." As the evening wound down, Dr. Henderson watched the judge explaining basic archaeological concepts to an enthusiastic undergraduate. In the display case behind them, the artifact that had started it all caught the light, its ancient markings a testament to the stories waiting to be discovered, in the ground, in courtrooms, and in the unexpected connections between people willing to look past first impressions.